Innovation means creating and delivering greater value for customers based on a better understanding of them. Innovation means creating and delivering greater value to customers or transferees based on a better understanding of them. There's 7 steps in the process of innovation. And I want to walk through each one of those steps right now and give you some examples. Step 1 is observe customers and talk with customers. Remember, insight comes from sight. If you really, really want to understand where you can create more value for other people, go and observe those people. See what it is that they go through. 1 month ago today, I spoke at the Subway Franchisee Association in Chicago. 4,000 Subway franchisees came together from around the world to a conference in Chicago. 5 days before I spoke to the Subway franchisees, I went to work at a Subway store. For 3 hours, I stood behind the sandwich artists and I watched as they interacted with the guest when they walked into the Subway store. I went to 7 Subway stores and I sat and had a sandwich and I observed customers as they walked into the Subway store. And here is what I noticed. There are 2 completely different experiences at a Subway store. The first experience is where the sandwich artist never raises their head. They keep their head down and their eyes down the whole time. And they go through all the questions. What type of sandwich would you like? What type of bread do you want? 6-inch or 12-inch? What type of cheese would you like that? And they never lift their head the entire time until the customer finally leaves the store or sits down to eat their meal. I call that the car assembly line experience. That's what it feels like for the customer. And there's a lot of pressure involved. The other type of Subway experience is where the sandwich artist lifts their head, makes eye contact, and smiles. What type of bread would you like today? Is that 6-inch or 12-inch? What type of cheese would you, what type of sandwich would you like? What type of cheese, what would you like on your sandwich? And the whole time they're making eye contact and they're smiling, and it's a totally different experience. It's what I call the relationship experience. The sandwich artist does exactly the same thing, says exactly the same words, but there are 2 totally different experiences. The car assembly line experience and the relationship experience. I encourage you folks to go and observe your customers as they interact with your employees. If you're moving household goods, or you work in the title business, or you're a real estate broker, go and observe and see if something as small as the tilt of a person's head and whether or not they make eye contact and smile and relax could make a difference in that experience. The second part of that statement is talk with customers. I'm not talking about a formal survey here. I'm talking about an informal conversation. What is of value to you right now? What's not of value? What would make this of more value to you? One of you in the room here sent me an email, and you said that in the last 6 months, one question that you've added to your business is you ask a transferee, how do you feel about this move? And just by asking that question, how do you feel about this move, the person is able to vent and get feelings off their chest that otherwise they weren't getting out there to anyone other than perhaps their spouse. And the person who asked the question may or may not be able to solve the issues. But by giving that customer, that transferee, the opportunity to answer the question, it actually is adding value. Talk with customers. The next one, step B. Be the customer. Be the customer. What we think is intuitively obvious to us may not be intuitively obvious to the customer. Last February, I was in charge of the Valentine's dinner at my church. 15 couples were getting together for Valentine's dinner at somebody's house. 3 hours before the dinner, I went to a local bakery. I had ordered a quarter-sheet cake for the dinner that night. So I got to the bakery, and the baker brought the cake over, and I said, wow, that looks beautiful. I said, let's open up the box and make sure everything is right. It was supposed to say, Happy Valentine's Day, St. Lucas Women. So she opened up the box, and it said, Happy Valentine's Day, St. Lucas Women in red. And so I looked at her, and I said, ma'am, what I meant was, why are the words in red here? And she pulled out a sheet of paper, and she said, it says right here, Happy Valentine's Day, St. Lucas Women in red. I said, ma'am, what I meant was, I wanted the icing in red, not the words in red. She said, no problem. She scooped off the words in red. She put white icing on it, and she said, here you go. I went to the party that night, and I told that story to the people at the party, and somebody at the party said to me, I had that exact same experience at that same bakery. If the manager of the bakery or the owner of the bakery had become a customer of the bakery, then he or she may have realized what customers were going through. I read a blog. Peggy Smith wrote a blog, and maybe a lot of you saw it. But Peggy Smith wrote a blog. She said, I have moved 63,000 people. I have relocated 63,000 people. And she said, I understood all of the logistics involved in a relocation. But she said, but when I was the customer, when I was the transferee and moving from Seattle, Washington to Washington, D.C., I was ready for all the logistics. But she wrote, the part that I wasn't ready for was the emotional aspects of being relocated. She and her husband had built a home in Seattle, and they had taken pictures as the home was being built. They had helped design the home. She said, I just really wasn't emotionally ready, and neither was my daughter, to leave that home and to move to Washington, D.C. If you really, really want to understand what people go through, try to be the customer. Even if it means moving from one side of your location, your city, to another side of the city, or adjusting something in your home, or changing something that you've never done before, see what it's like to go through a significant change in your life so that you can better understand what other people go through. C, walk through every step of the customer's journey. From the first time that someone goes to one of your websites and looks at it, to the first time they talk to someone on the phone, to the first time they have a face-to-face conversation, to the first day that someone's second-grade child attends a new school, look at every step in the customer's journey and ask yourself, is there anything that we could do that would add more value to this customer at this point in time? One of you, in an email, wrote to me that something that you have added in the last 6 or 7 months is that when you looked at every part of the process that a transferee goes through, you realized that when people move into a new home, sometimes they get into the home and everything is great, and then little things start to break. And the relocated employee, the transferee, does not know any good handymen in the neighborhood. They just don't know who to call. And so one of the things that this person wrote to me was, we now provide them with a list of reliable, good handymen that they can call to fix little things around the house. Look at every step in the process of a transferee goes through and ask yourself at every step, what could I do, what could we do that would add more value to that transferee? The next step, study the first 2 seconds of every customer interaction. Of every interaction with a transferee, study the first 2 seconds. The first 2 seconds on a website, the first 2 seconds at a phone call, the first 2 seconds of a face-to-face meeting. The first 2 seconds could really impact the whole experience. I learned this lesson in my work with McDonald's. I've coached a whole lot of people at McDonald's, executives and managers, and what we would do is we would go to visit McDonald's restaurants, and we would stand in the background and we would observe a crew member interacting with a guest in a McDonald's restaurant. And here is something that we learned. We called it the 2-second rule. If the crew member made eye contact and smiled and was polite in the first 2 seconds, and something went wrong with the order later on, the customer was much more patient. If the crew member kind of looked at the customer from a side angle, never made eye contact, never lifted their head, and asked, "What would you like?" and something went wrong with the order, the customer was much less patient. Study the first 2 seconds of every piece, every interaction with your customers. Apply your strengths and passions. After you have really worked to better understand your transferees, after you've really worked to better understand a business, a corporation, or a government agency to see how you can add value, then ask yourself, how can we leverage our strengths and our passions in a way that will add value to what they're facing? So first work to understand them, and then ask yourself, how can we use our passions and our strengths to add greater value to this customer, whether it's a transferee, a corporation, or a government agency? And here's the final step in the process of innovation. I call this